Hi. I've grown to enjoy working on this Forgotten Treasures series as they allow me to talk more about games that either went under the radar or shined and then disappeared unexpectedly. And today I have a few fun ones. There are two completely different mechanically adventure games, a game that's a mixture of a fighter and unusual sport, former arcade hit that spawned numerous sequels, and finally, a dungeon manager like no other. So, without any further ado, let's jump straight in. When you think about 1990s point-and-click adventure games, it's either LucasArts or Sierra that first come to mind. And no wonder, as they were the masters of the genre, the king and the queen respectively, and in terms of Sierra, also quite literally, because of Miss Roberta Williams, who was a brilliant at the time video game designer. And most of the best and genre-defining games came from these two companies. Most, but not all. Flight of the Amazon Queen is one of those titles that seemingly came from nowhere, owed everyone who had a chance to sample it then and there with its uncanny quality, and then near instantly was abandoned and forgotten, resurfacing only from time to time in a video game list or compilations such as this one, which is a shame, as it could really give our two giants a run for their money. Interestingly enough, despite being available on DOS PC, Flight of the Amazon Queen was originally developed for and on the Amiga, using famous at the time Deluxe Paint software for graphics. What is Deluxe Paint, you may wonder? Well, imagine modern Photoshop, but in low resolution, low color mode, then add a frame-by-frame animation module to it and a black menacing background. That's Deluxe Paint. A revolutionary at the time piece of software. Coming back to our game though, it's a point-and-click humorous adventure that's full of quirky humor and funny situations. Which makes sense as the style side of it was seemingly inspired by the Monkey Island games, while the gameplay was based on the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie. Both LucasArts IPs, mind you, and both excellent. And as sources of inspirations go, devs couldn't have picked much better, at least back then in the mid-90s. Flight of the Amazon Queen is set in 1949 and places you in the worn-out but comfortable shoes of Joe King, a pilot for hire, a lover by night, and a sarcastic comment manufacturing machine whenever he opens his mouth. Most importantly, however, a proud owner of the Amazon Queen, a beautiful beast of an airplane that he uses for work. Don't you find it curious how these old games and movies always portrayed their protagonists having like the most interesting and exciting jobs ever? I mean, a private plane owner working out of a remote location, somewhere in the amazingly picturesque and enchanting part of the world, a place most of us would only dream of seeing once, and he just can't wait to get out of. Or an archaeologist/university teacher turned adventurer treasure hunter, who has no trouble at all mixing these two completely different lifestyles together and navigates armed NAZ-filled tombs with same ease he does his classroom. Or a private investigator with dark past, heart of gold, uncontrollable hankering for a firewater, and a morose outlook on life. Or even ex-cop turned bounty hunter with ties to both, law and the underworld, and an untouchable arch-enemy/nemesis that he will have to face and defeat against all odds eventually. Usually by breaking one of his fundamental and previously thought unbreakable personal rules that will leave him successful at his mission, but mentally a wreck. And these were the heroes of our youth. And this is also a hero of our today's game. Well, one of the four at least. So Joe has a plane and is waiting in a hotel room in Rio de Janeiro for his customer, famous movie actress Miss Faye Russell, known for her beauty and not by her smarts. Which is a mistake, as she is as sharp as she is stunning. That, however, will come out along the adventure later on. As Joe is waiting for her patiently, watching paint dry, counting floor tiles and flies in the room, all to kill time naturally, he is ambushed by his biggest competitors Anderson and locked in the very same room. It's a dick move, and one that leaves our hero in a rather uncomfortable position, as not only he has to free himself to not lose the lucrative transport contract, but also the free beers he had before getting there are now playing all kinds of drum and guitar solos on his bladder, letting it know it's time to evacuate what's within it. Luckily, John manages to escape with enlisting help of a showgirl Lola, his former love interest, and he gets to the airport just in time to prevent Anderson from stealing his job. All this is just a setup for an adventure and a half that's ahead of Joe King, and one that's filled with all kinds of action. Stuff like crash landing in the middle of the Amazon jungle, cooperating with an unexpected trader named Bob, who's been living among the indigenous to the jungle tribe, and saving Jungle Princess Azura from a predicament she's found herself in. All of that and much, much, much more will happen to Joe, Faye and Joe's mechanic Sparky in the heart of the Amazon jungle. So, playing Flight of the Amazon Queen, you'll have your hands full with both adventure and fun, and it will hook you from the very first joke all the way to the closing scene. That's how great of a game it is. Presentation-wise, both in terms of sound design and graphics, Flight of the Amazon Queen is fantastic, and at a similar level to what LucasArts was capable of at the time. So absolute best of the best, creme de la creme of visual and oral excellence. The story is pretty sweet too, unveiling at a steady movie-like pace, and the puzzles are not too demanding, but also not trivial either. The game is an excellent pick for hardened genre aficionados and newbies alike. Now this is gonna take me a minute to explain. So before I do that, I'll talk about the plot, or a background rather, for Rakugaki Showtime, as for once, it's easier to explain than the gameplay is, and that doesn't happen often. Somewhere out there in an imaginary universe lives a godlike entity known only as the mysterious God Hand, and God Hand created Rakugaki, a magical arena-based world, and everything that lives in it. Among it our 4 heroes of Yukiwo, Sasami, Pitan, and Tsubuhachi, and a whole slew of different bodies big and small. The enemies are led by the big evil going by the name of Daddy, not Sugar Daddy mind you, he's not gonna shower you with money and uncomfortably groom you into a position you'd never wanted to find yourself in. Nope, he's just a plain old regular daddy. And since he leads all the bodies, in my mind he's a body daddy. Well, it may be a stretch, but that's at least how I imagine him to be. Anyway, since the age-old clash of good versus evil is what the God Hand wanted, our heroes have no choice but to defeat the enemies, their leader, and eventually even take on the God Hand itself to regain their freedom and lives. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a weird story. Quite fortunately, it's also largely irrelevant, as it's the gameplay that's the most fun about the game. Rakugaki Showtime never released in the West, it only ever came out in Japan, so finding it on a physical medium outside of the country is near impossible. Well, at least for the price that will not have you sell one of your kidneys, and your best bet with trying it out is to emulate it. It may be something that some of you hardcore collectors despise, but it's also something that will not jeopardize your meals for the next month. It's a 1 to 4 players, simultaneous madness-filled action-packed craze of a game that feels like a weird and twisted love child between Dodgeball and Super Smash Bros. And I believe that one sentence might have explained the game better than the next few will. I will try though, so please, bear with me. The game is played on series of stages that are enclosed arenas full of bodies and various different objects too. You know, rocks, grenades, landmines, black holes, ICBMs. Yes, you heard that right, I said ICBMs and smiley faces among others. And all of them can be grabbed and tossed at the enemies to dispose of them. Each of these items has their own unique effect. I mean, it has to, right? One of them is a mother effing ICBM after all. And they all can be thrown in one of 3 ways. Normal, fast and low. And it's up to you to pick the right one to cause as much damage to the opponent as possible and, well, connect. Cause that needs to happen for the effect to take place too. Easily the most interesting and useful out of all throwable objects are the smiley faces, which, with each connecting throw, become more and more upset, eventually fully enraging, which funny enough plays out to the tune of Hallelujah. When you throw them then, at the peak of their anger, you can unleash one of the 3 character-specific, super special moves, which are considerably stronger than the rest. Rakugaki Showtime is maddeningly addictive, and it's hard to tell why. Because there was no other game like it before, no other after, and chances are there'll be no other like it ever again. It's equally as fun and over-the-top crazy when played with friends as a party game as it is when you go through it alone. And you will. And more than once, I can pretty much guarantee it. You just have to give it a chance, as it's much more playable than the video alone could ever give away. A single-player playthrough takes roughly 30 to 60 minutes tops, and each successful run with a new character unlocks another, previously unknown, with its own unique melee hand-to-hand attacks and 3 super special moves. Creative mechanics, fun, simple to learn and difficult to master loop of mixing melee with dodgeball shit-throwing gameplay, complemented by a stellar, hand-drawn-like graphics and a killer tune, make Rakugaki Showtime a truly unforgettable and one-of-a-kind experience. And one you'll no doubt fall in love with. I have a very special love for party games, because I feel that the emergence of online gaming kinda killed it off. And while I do appreciate my online stuff, I really do, I miss those days when you could just hang around with friends on a couch in front of a small TV, playing versus games with both your controllers and elbows, trying to one-up another whichever the way you could. And it's not something that many games allow for today. If you miss these days or just love quirky and unusual arcade titles, Rakugaki Showtime should definitely be something on your crosshair. Believe it or not, but I've actually not seen Punk, aka Buster Brothers, first in the arcades. It was on the Amiga at my friend's house, before I even had an Amiga of my own. And while I rocked sweet C64 back then, and there was a port of Punk on the system, I've not had a chance to try it out by then yet, mainly because I didn't even know that it existed, but that's beside the point. So, after seeing it on the Amiga and then playing it in the arcades, I can tell you without a shred of any doubt in my mind 2 of the most important things about it. First of all, it's a fantastic arcade title for 1 or 2 players and a great fun. And secondly, that Amiga port is arcade perfect and well worth having and trying. C64's outing is amazing for the power that the system had too, but naturally downgraded in the presentation department to fit the 8-bit capabilities of the machine. The world has been overtaken, nay, overrun, nay, overbounced by thousands if not tens of thousands of deadly bouncing balloons, and they terrorize everyone wherever they appear. And since these balloons are sentient and dicks, they've decided to take over our monuments, our symbols of growth and progress first, and they've set themselves in 50-ish spots over 17 unique locations all around the world, in Mount Fuji, Temple of the Emerald Buddha, Angkor Wat, Ayers Rock, the Taj Mahal, Leningrad, Paris, London, Barcelona, Athens, Egypt, Mount Kilimanjaro, New York, Mayan ruins, Antarctica, and finally Easter Island. Each of these locations has its own theme and background, showing its most famous landmarks, and is composed out of 3 consecutive stages. They also contain different layouts of destructible and indestructible blocks that serve as a difficulty adding factor to all the balloon popping that you'll be doing. While the balloons are evil, we've established that already, they come from a different environment to ours. And instead of growing limbs like we did, they evolved to move by bouncing and replicate by splitting, which actually makes their movements predictable, and with a bit of skill and luck, a brave hero or heroes can try cleansing the planet of the Scourge. And you, my dear viewer, are that hero. And if there's a friend with you, he or she is too. Each stage comprises of a different number of these oh so evil balloons in various sizes bouncing all over it. And you and a friend, or just you alone, are armed with a harpoon gun and sent to deal with them. You do so by popping the balloons by shooting upwards. When hit, they split into 2 smaller ones until eventually they become so small that hitting them destroys them. So it will be up to you to bring the peace back to the world. Every now and then, when balloon pops, it drops a bonus pickup, and I don't have to tell you how useful this can be. And especially that Punk is truly an arcade game through and through, and it gets really demanding very fast. These power-ups can be a double harpoon, which allows you to take 2 shots at the same time, a grappling wire that connects top and bottom of the screen and doesn't disappear until a balloon pops on it, Vulcan missile, which for all intents and purposes is just a machine gun type of a weapon, a force field that allows you to get hit by a balloon once without dying, an hourglass that slows the bouncing considerably, a clock which stops time for a short while, and finally a stick of dynamite which instantly pops all the balloons into their most basic smallest form, which may perhaps be the one that actually vanishes when hit, but will also come in large number and will bounce at low height only, making the whole effort more demanding when used prematurely. In many ways, Punk is a perfect arcade game. It's simple in its design so that you can instantly just jump in and start playing, but it's also rather demanding and increases in the difficulty fast, making it challenging to complete. Its formula proved so addictive and fun in fact that not only it was ported to nearly all platforms under the sun, but the sequels to it followed soon after and in large numbers. And today, the series comprises of 7 unique games released on many different systems. If you enjoy the arcade titles other than the beat-em-ups, fighting games or traditional shooters, then this one's definitely a game for you to try out. The Neverhood is a crime. It's a crime that was committed in 1996 on Windows and 2 years later on PlayStation, and no one caught the culprits and bring them to justice. Because if they did, I'm sure it'd be a franchise by now, and one that sells millions of copies with each next release and sparks imaginations of many generations. I mean, it may not be as mechanically deep as the Little Big Planet games are, but from the puzzle and humorous point of view, Neverhood is a masterpiece and could base its theoretical longevity on these aspects alone. And if it did and released, let's say every 2, 3 or 4 years apart, we'd had the Neverhood 10 to Never to Hood by now, and it would be a sweet, sweet title and possibly a Game of the Year contender. Or not, and maybe the series would have died around the 4th entry. Point is, we will never know. Neverhood is a point-and-click adventure made using claymation for its graphics. If that term sounds odd, but also like something that you've heard before, mentioned in a random conversation, or something that you've read on a webpage somewhere, let me explain. Claymation is a combination of 2 words, clay and animation. And it's actually exactly that. Sculptured characters, environments and items, all made out of clay and animated using the stop-motion recording. And I don't have to tell you, as you can clearly see for yourself, but it looks so amazing. It's a graphic style that never gets old, and Neverhood looks as incredible today as it did nearly 30 years ago. I mean, sure, I'd love to see it in Full HD, or better yet 4K, but even in its low by today's standards resolution, it's still beautiful. The game is set in a titular mysterious world of Neverhood, with you playing as the Clayman, with a K and not C, you know, for the obligatory 1990s cool factor. At the very beginning of his adventure, our hero wakes up with a complete amnesia, not knowing who he is, where he is, or even what he's supposed to do. You know, the trifecta of the excellent video game beginnings. And there's nothing there around him to fill in the gaps, so you have to figure it all out all by yourself by just trying things out. by pushing or pulling stuff, by interacting with everything, and by observing the results of these investigations. So start with exploration and mad clicking on everything around you. All the objects and the environment, anything that looks like it deserves your mouse's touch, do so, and often more than once. And as you do, you'll begin finding these mysterious discs, and each of them contains a part, a bigger or smaller chunk of the game's story, that will in time begin forming a larger whole that will eventually not only make sense, but also explain everything about Clayman and his role in this weird world. And while the game's plot is unique and charming, it's actually intertwined with all these finds and problems you'll need to solve. So I decided not to spoil it for you by talking about it too much. Neverhood, being an adventure game, is naturally full of puzzles, and these are rather varied. Some are really demanding and will require you to attempt and fail them a few times before you finally figure out the solution, while the others are a child's play and you won't even notice that you're completing them as you go about your Clayman day. A few may require you to pick up and use items in appropriate spots, but most are centered around solving riddles and interaction with the environment. It's a refreshing approach to the genre, not offering any kind of inventory and rather demanding that you use your brain. It may take a minute to get used to, but it's very rewarding when you finally do. The only odd thing about the Neverhood that I can think of is that you can never really tell how demanding the next puzzle's going to be, which, as it's easy to guess, makes the progression in its world feel a bit uneven. The difficulty aside, the best thing about the puzzles is that all of them, and all of your interactions with the world too, result in beautiful animations showing the effects and outcomes of your actions, your successes and failures, and all of that in a humorous, often downright hilarious way. And seeing them play out is always super fun. The unique way that Neverhood tells its tale, allowing you to learn it bit by bit over time and not giving you a straight up quest of, I don't know, let's say rescuing the princess hidden in a castle, saving the world from a race of intergalactic sentient ship-like beings, or whatever else, is something that's very rarely used in games in the genre, and feels magical and natural when you get used to it. Neverhood is a true work of art, and a game that's more charming and heartwarming at times than it ever had any reason to be. It's an incredible adventure worth getting immersed in and taken on a ride in this beautiful movie-like world of colorful clay. You might have noticed by now that I've been mixing in some newer games in this Forgotten Treasures video series of mine, and it's deliberate and by design. It's because I've noticed that many of you consider modern games to be trash, boring, devoid of creativity, or worse of all, not fun. And I disagree. Sure, not all games are great, and many of them are more of the same, refreshed every year, with a new and higher number plastered next to the title only, and yeah, I'm looking at you, EA and Ubisoft. But what you tend to overlook when thinking about the modern releases are the indies. Now, indies, these can be fantastic. They are not only still good, creative and breaking all the walls and rules we thought unbreakable in video game design before, but also doing it better than one could imagine. I'd risk saying that we're in the gold era of video game creativity, if we're only willing to look deeper under the surface of all the quote-unquote greats into games with smaller budgets and bigger hearts behind them, and Legend of Keepers is one of those games. Legend of Keepers Career of Dungeon Master is a title that could theoretically be described with one sentence, and since I'm in a playful mood, why not try? It's a turn-based, side-view pixel graphics, Dungeon Keeper-inspired, roguelite-ish RPG management game. And that tells you everything you need to know about it, all the while sounding like gibberish, and I think it's best that I expanded upon it at least a little. It's a roguelite dungeon management mixture which places you in a position of being a dungeon overlord, aiming to protect it from upcoming groups of heroes by placing traps, and most importantly, appropriately evil and deadly monsters. Monsters that you can train, evolve, and better as the time goes by, as your finances allow you to, and if you survive to even be able to do so. Before each wave of heroes attacks, you are shown who they will be and can carefully inspect their stats, skills and resistances. This allows you to pick the best traps and monsters to counter and defeat them, and place them strategically too, as positioning is the king in Legend of Keepers. Both, in terms of particular screens on which you're placing the monsters in either first, middle or last slot based on their stats and skills, and also which screen you place these monsters on overall. It may for instance be better to first poison all the goody two-shoes on one screen, then weaker them with traps on another, so that the final creatures that they'll meet will pick them apart with strong attacks and devastating specials. It may, or it may not, as there is tons of tactics to the planning and the combat phases in this one. And while you may go for the HP alone, you can also entirely skip it and aim to frighten the adventurers into straight up abandoning your dungeon and running away. Both work as well, and both are represented by a separate numerical counter under each hero. So while you may encounter adventurers so strong that defeating them may seem impossible at the time, it's worth remembering that strength does not equal courage, and it may be much easier to send a few roars, grunts and boost their way rather than just straight up fight them to win. Now, unlike Dungeon Keeper that you may consider to be similar to Legend of Keepers, it doesn't simulate you in your home dungeon, which you have to protect to grow and prosper, but as an overlord, hired manager to protect an evil company's asset. So the treasure. The treasure at the end of said dungeon. You're not an owner or a ruler of it in any capacity, you're just an employee number XXX-69 and you're there to earn your wages. So after each wave of attacks that you successfully stopped, a management phase ensues, and while not as action-packed and tactical as the defense phase is, it's arguably even more crucial. Each of the multiple stages of the management phase have to be carefully considered, as while they all present a few options, only one of them can be picked. So deciding between upgrading of traps, hiring of new monsters, training those that you currently have, which also takes time and is not instantaneous I must add, or even pillaging of a nearby town for more gold, and countless other random events is not easy at all and can make or break your entire gameplay if rushed. While the preparation and then combat formula may seem very similar to that of Dungeon Keeper in theory, how it's realized and how it plays out is entirely unique and, dare I say it, more fun. The turn-based battles are not slow at all and feel like a breeze, and the management phase is not only surprisingly strategic, but also full of humorous remarks, jokes and downright funny random events. Sure, sometimes they may end your game unexpectedly, but they'll do so with you chuckling at how they did. Legend of Keepers' presentation is the bomb. It's an homage to old pixel-based games of yore, and boy oh boy, does it look sweet. It may all be built around clusters of animated colorful square blocks, but the number of details in each monster or hero, their animations and style are just fan-freaking-tastic, and you'll love the way the game looks nearly as much as you will love how it plays. The sound design is pretty good too, though definitely taking a backseat to the graphics. All in all, looking and sounding like a star, Legend of Keepers plays like one too and provides near infinite replayability of its random-based gameplay loop, which with addition of unlockable different skilled dungeon masters to play as, makes it literally infinite in the fun that it can offer. Make sure to check it out. Whenever I make one of these videos, I can usually mentally place them on a virtual scale of how good they are. In terms of the games I've spoke about, my narration, cringe, which I seem to ooze in every other sentence, and overall quality of the final render. And those that I'm really happy about usually do rather bad, and on the contrary, those that I feel that I've made a few mistakes with tend to perform decently. So, I'm not gonna tell you what I think of this one, and instead ask you to tell me in the comments section. And while you're there, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe, and hitting the bell down there too, because that will guarantee that YouTube will let you know when I release something new. So for me this is all, take care of yourself, be as awesome as you usually are, and play games.
あとはプレイヤーの腕次第といったところだな。では。ゴールで待ってるぞ。
デモはここまで。あとは思い切り